Yeah, I've been up all night. I'm thinking I'm going to have to post on the Facebook group to get the answer. No, it's okay. I'm going to take a picture with my phone and my screen, and they'll know. I don't need to explain it much. I'll just take a picture and they can look at the picture and they'll know exactly what it is and they'll tell me the answer. Yeah, I'll do that now. I'll do it now. From the edit page then, what we need to do, we need to open the effects panel. So that's in the top left corner. So we're just going to select effects. That opens our effects panel. And what we're looking for is a fusion composition. So if we come to Toolbox, and then we come down to Effects, and then here at the top, we've got Fusion Composition. If you think of Fusion Composition as an empty container that's going to hold either the visual effects, or in this case, it's going to hold our lower third. My first tip would be, next to Fusion, you'll see this little star here. If you select this, and what it'll do, it'll put it down into the favorites down here. And what that means is wherever you are inside this menu, you've always got access here to your Fusion composition. I'm going to click and drag it from my favorites to my timeline. I'm then going to close the effects panel to give me some room. Now straight away, you see a little bit of a problem. It's very, very small. What I'm going to do is just use Shift and Z to zoom in and give us some focus. But I want you to notice that we've lost some of the timeline. The timeline's moved down here. Now I've done this on purpose because I want to show you a little trick that we can use. By default, the Fusion composition is 5 seconds. That can be changed inside the preferences of DaVinci Resolve, but at the moment when you're starting, I recommend you don't do that. And that's because if you send this to somebody and they're going to use it, then the chances are their default is 5 seconds as well. Unless you've told them, I would stick to the default. The reason for that is if you use keyframes, it works within that 5 second spot. And there are nodes you can add to stretch the keyframe. But we're going to make it so easy because we're going to use AnimCurves. And AnimCurves will recalculate all the animation based on the length of the composition. So we don't have to worry about keyframes and we don't have to worry about the length of our lower third, in this case, our Fusion composition. But there are some things I do want to show you. If we hover over the Fusion clip and then we come to the edge, you'll see the cursor change. And this is so we can click and drag it. Now in this instance, I want my lower third to be the full length of my clip. And what you can do with the cursor as it is now, if you click your mouse button, the edge will turn green, which means we've got hold of it. And we can just drag this down to our cut here. Now you'll notice just as it gets to the cut, it sort of snaps. And that's our snapping feature that's on. And the snapping control is just here. It's this magnet, or we could use the keyboard shortcut N. One of the advantages of using N as a keyboard shortcut is if I bring this back here, and you'll see that the snapping's gone off. When I come to the edge, it doesn't snap anymore. So if I want to overlap, then I can do that by taking snapping off. I can get really precise in there. But we're going to stick with snapping, and I'm going to make it smaller again to show you some more things. One thing I found that's super useful is this. If I double click on my clip, it will go into the source viewer. And in the source viewer, in the top left, you can see the time code. And the time code is 36 seconds and 5 frames. What we can do is we can select our Fusion clip, right click, and we can change the clip duration. We can use the keyboard shortcut Control and D as well. So I'll select this, and this will open our change clip duration panel. Now at the moment, don't worry about frames. Because we're looking at a time code in the source viewer, we want to stay on this time code portion of the page. But what's really easy is I can just type in 3605. I don't need any of the colons. And then when I click change, this will then go to the length of my clip. Now you may be saying, well, I can just drag it to the end of my clip. Yes, you can. But look what we wanted to do if we wanted to drag it to the end of the timeline. So I'm actually going to right click on this, go back to clip duration, and you'll see some presets. The preset when you bring it in is 5 seconds. So let's make it 5 seconds. But then let's hold down Shift and Z to make the timeline the full length. So I can see the full length of my timeline. And this timeline isn't very long, it's only 12 minutes long. And it's impossible to click and drag because I'm looking at the whole of my timeline. And if you imagine you've got a 30-minute or an hour program, this is just going to get fiddly. But there is a better way. I'm doing Shift and Z again, just to bring back in my Fusion. This time, if we look in the timeline viewer, viewer 2, and if the playhead is over any of the clips, we'll see something. The reason it's black is it's because it's over the Fusion clip. Inside the timeline viewer, you can see the time code is 12 minutes, 44 seconds, and 16 frames. So all we need to do is come into the clip duration. We type in 12 minutes, 44 seconds, and 16 frames, and press enter. And now that Fusion composition is the full length of the timeline. If you wanted to have something the full length of your timeline, for example, in the last video I did, I had a timer in the bottom right corner. I just made it the full length of the program or the tutorial on its own track. If I now do Control and D, it brings up that panel. I can click my 5 seconds again. It's straight back to its size. Shift and Z. So that is a little tip on how to make your Fusion composition the size you want. I'm going to have it the full length of my clip. All you need to do is bring the playhead over the top of the Fusion composition, and we're going to now go into Fusion. So we're going to select Fusion. In Fusion, we've just got one node. That is the media out. That's going to send what we're going to do back to the timeline. I'm going to close the effects panel on the Fusion page just to give me some more real estate, and I'm going to open the inspector fully, so just here it'll give me the full length so you can see what I'm doing in the inspector. Normally I'll bring in a background node, and then that background node will be canvas. I'm going to do something a bit different this time. I'm going to keep it really simple, and I'm going to come to our toolbar, click text once, and then we can connect our text to our media out. So now we've got our text on the screen. Let's make some room. We'll make it one viewer. You may have been using a different application previously. It could have been a titling application. It could have been After Effects. You may have been working inside the viewer. Inside DaVinci Resolve, that is possible. We tend to go into the inspector because there's more controls and it's more powerful. But if you do want to use the viewer to put in your text, you can just come up to the top left of the viewer. We've got several controls. The first one allows us to type in the preview window. The second one's quite funky. What it does, you can move the characters around the screen, and then all the rest are really to do with outline. So if I select this, we get a cursor on the screen, and I'm going to type in my title. So I've typed in Mountains in France. Before we leave the viewer though, I will show you this little control here. If we select this, you'll notice below each letter we've got a little green box. And what that means is we can move the letters around, which is quite unusual, but it's just something that's there. So I'm going to Control and Z and get back out of there, and then deselect that. So all the work I'm going to be doing is inside the inspector. What I'm going to do is come into my inspector, and the first thing I'm going to do is change the font. And I've got into Poppins recently, and I'm going to change it to medium. Now we will look at something to do with the font when we've made this into a macro, because if I send this to you and you don't have Poppins installed, you're just going to get a black screen. Below this, we've got our controls. We're probably going to make it smaller, but here we can click inside this box and use the mouse to slide, or we can use the slider to change it the size. We've got the tracking, so we can change the gap. We've got line spacing, and then we've got anchor, and anchor is really powerful. And for lower third, I would probably use, and in this case I'm going to use, the left horizontal anchor. And that's because we're going to put it down here in the bottom left. So let's bring it down here, and I'm going to make it a lot smaller. I'm going to bring it down here. Now to get it aligned correctly, if we click inside the viewer and select Control and G, we will get our safe area. So we can see, let's bring it down here. So we're in the safe area. But by using the horizontal anchor, then what we're doing is we get the M and the F lined up here. And the idea is when I type in now, it's going to come over to the right. It's not going to go left and off screen. I've got my Mountains in France, lower third. Well, we need a background really, don't we? But my brief is to have a dual tone background. Well, we can do that. Every font, every text plus node has 8 elements available to you. 4 of them are already set up for you, and you can just adapt them. And the other 4, just user settings, you put whatever you want in here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come into 2, and you can see that's for a red outline. Well, I don't want an outline on these, but if I come into 3, shadow, I do want a shadow. And then 4, it says border, but I'm going to change that to BG for background. and then I'm going to enable it. At the moment it's a bit messy, and that's because as we come down, we've got here, it says character, so I'm going to change that to text so it covers the whole text. As you can come into here and you can change the colour. We could just have it black. What I'd like to do is have this a two-tone. I want the top half different than the bottom half. We can have any colour in here, and we can also bring in images. Leave that for a later video because I want to keep this simple. If we go into gradient, we've got black at the bottom and white at the top. But then if we come down to mapping size and change that to 0, drag it all the way down, and then we go to mapping level text, we now see that we've got our duotone. So I can click here and then select a different colour. And now I've got a duotone background just by using one node. Also in this background, we've got the opportunity here to shear. So we can just tilt them 0.25, and then because it's quite close to that I'm going to come back to here where it says horizontal and just make it a little bit bigger, and there we go. So if I come back to the edit page, I've now got my lower third. Now I could do with bringing it a little bit lower down, so we'll go back into Fusion. I'm just going to grab hold of it and bring it down here. Let's go back in. So I've now got my nice lower third, really simple, one node using what's inside the text node. I'm going to do some animation with this. I'm going to have it coming up from below the frame. Now one thing I want to point out here, and this is going back to the edit page, is this is where this fusion composition I recommend being 5 seconds. So if I right click and change duration, and then select 5 and change, and just take it to 5 seconds. We're going to be using AnimCurves, so it doesn't matter what length, but if you send it to somebody, you want it to work. So I'm going to reduce this to 5 seconds because I'm now going to add some animation. With the playhead over the Fusion comp, I'm going to select Fusion, we go back into Fusion, and now we can add some animation. And I always add animation using another node, which is the transform node. With the text highlighted, I'm just going to come to the transform and click once, and then now that is connected. I'm going to have an in animation and I'm going to have an out animation. There is a way of doing it in one node using AnimCurves and an expression, but I want to keep this really simple. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to set up my animation intro in transform 1, and then I'm going to copy it to do an animation outro, and that way everything matches up. I'm going to make sure the transform one's highlighted, and I'm going to come into the inspector. What I want is this to come up from below the screen, so that's the y-axis. If I come to the center and right click and come down to modify width, I don't have the option for AnimCurves, and that's because AnimCurves is only going to work on one parameter, and the center parameter has two. It has X and Y. So the stage I need to put in before is to select the modifier X Y Path. That will then give me a modifier that splits the X and Y. It also gives me more controls, Z and another center and size, which I'm not going to use here. That's the way to get AnimCurves. You'll notice on the X and Y we've got a keyframe. I'm going to remove them, and on the Y-axis, which is the axis I want to work on, right click, modify with AnimCurves. I've now got an AnimCurve modifier for the Y-axis. I'm going to change transition to duration because it's not a transition. I'm going to have easing, and I'm going to have it as expo. What I've noticed, it's going to start off the screen, but it'll come on the screen in the wrong place. So I want it to end at 0.5, and that's because if you look at the transform node bounding box, the green, then when we're down here, it's halfway. So there we go. So we want to go from halfway to halfway, and because it's a lower third, it's down in this bottom corner. So as we come in, it stops there. Then I'm going to speed it up a little bit. I'm going to speed it up. I think we'll have 3. We'll see how we try with that. So that's my AnimCurves set up. I'm going to jump back into the edit page and have a look at this, so we can see it, but it's not too big. And then we've got it coming in, and it comes in okay. It's quick enough, but it doesn't go out. We need to do an outro. Playhead over the top of the Fusion composition, back into Fusion. We've got the intro then, so now I need an outro. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste it, and I need to connect it up. Now at the moment it's identical, so they're doing exactly the same thing, but I'm coming into the second transform. We'll come into modifiers, make sure we've got AnimCurves, and there's a few parameters I need to change here. The in and out, I need to swap them over. What this is the in curve of the animation and the out curve of the animation. So when it was off screen, the in curve was off screen. I didn't need it, but the outro part I did, or the out of the animation. This is the opposite. then I need my curve. I then want to invert it. I'm going to leave it at 0.5. I'm going to leave it at 3, but I need to delay it. I'm going to try 0.6 just to see what happens. Come back into the edit page and then play it through. Comes in, stays on the screen, and then goes off. Now, one thing to note is because we're using AnimCurves, if I extend this, so if I click and make it a little bit longer, it's going to come in, and then 60% down the timeline, it's going to go out. So it doesn't matter how long this is, because the AnimCurves is going to recalculate it. Now I think it's a little bit slow, so I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to increase the speed. Let's try 4 on that node, come in here. And we can pin the nodes, so I could pin that here, come back into here and pin that here. So I've got both of them and I can make that 4. We could also join them together. We could use an instance. Let's just see how this is. So it comes in now, stays on the screen for 60% of the composition, so it doesn't matter how long it is, and then it goes off the screen. So I think where it goes off, not overly happy about that, so I'm going to change this one here. I'm going to change this. I'm going to go for, I'm going to try back. No idea what it's going to do. Let's just have a look. So it's going to come in and then 60% down the composition. It's going to go up and off. I like that better. So I like that better, so we've got that there. So there we go, we've got an animated lower third built very quickly inside DaVinci Resolve Fusion. All I need to do now is rename these nodes. So I'm going to have this anim intro, and I'm going to have this one. And there we go for this part of the video. We're now going to take our lower third to the next level, and I'm going to introduce you to the follower modifier. I'm going to add a few little snippets in of things that you can use to improve your workflow. And the first one I'm going to do is, if I've got the text highlighted, go into the inspector, you'll notice that my style text box is 8 lines high and my text 2 lines high. So I'm going to change this. You'll notice when I hover over it in the bottom left, it says text 1, which is the name of the node, and style text is the ID. We need to make a note of the ID. I can come down to the text node, right click and go edit controls. This opens my edit controls panel, and then the ID for searching there, so I type style, it's already come up. But as soon as it comes up, you can just press tab and then you're inside that control. Make sure it's on the right page, so we want it to stay on the text page. I'm going to change the number of lines to 2. For those people that have done this before, you're going, no, it's going to go to the bottom of the inspector. Well, they fixed that, so it doesn't anymore. So now we've got our style text input box, the same height as our lower third. The next thing I'm thinking of doing is changing that word France to be the background color. Let's make this a bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing in the screen. Making this word France the same as the background color is quite easy. With the node selected, we're going to come up to shading. Shading, you have 8 elements you can change within the font, and the background is one of those elements. I'm actually going to come into the first element, which is the text itself, come down to color, select gradient. If this was selected, this would be white, but we want to have the black selected, so select this triangle. We click inside this box and it'll open a color picker, and then pick the screen color and grab the screen color from there and select OK. A couple of things to point out that might not be the same on yours is mapping size. Sometimes that's in the middle, and you can just see at the bottom of mountains we can see the color. That needs to be all the way down to the left, and the mapping level must be text. If we look into here, we've got some more options, but we want it to be in text. And that means we've now got the word France as the background color behind the mountain. I'm going to set up the rest of the font as I want it. With a follower, you need to make sure all your settings in the nodes are set up first before you add the follower. Otherwise, you're bouncing backwards and forwards between the node and the follower, and that can get really confusing. I'm going to come back into shading. I'm going to come to 3, which is the shadow, and I'm just going to select the shadow. I'm not going to adjust the shadow. It's just so I can show you something a little bit later on. I'm going to come back into our text, and now in the style text box I'm going to right click and I'm going to add the follower modifier. So I'm going to select follower from this context menu. It's going to add the modifier. A modifier is an extension of the controls in that node. There's different modifiers for different. We're looking at the follower, which is really powerful for text. If we come up to the top, we've got modifiers, and then we're in the modifier section. Now this first section, timings, we're going to come back to it. So I'm going to come into shading, and this is where it can get confusing if you're jumping backwards and forwards, because there's a shading tab in the modifier, there's also a shading tab in the node. Shading 1, which is activated, we've got the actual text. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to come to rotation. And there's other things I want to show you while we're in here. So I'm going to be doing things slightly strangely so I can show you other features as we go along. If I click into the time ruler and drag my mouse, I can actually come up to, let's say, 60 frames, and then this is now on screen. There's no point in having my animation when it's off screen, and this is as it's fully on screen. It's not the best place to have it, but I'm doing this on purpose so I can show you the keyframes editor. I've got it here where I'm on 60 frames. I'm going to come into the rotation and I'm going to set some keyframes on the X and the Y. I'm going to change these parameters to -90. So you now see that the font is on its back, but the shadow isn't. I'm going to deal with the shadow shortly, but I'm going to set everything up in here first. Now, if this is the start of my keyframe, I don't want to see the font, so I'm going to come into the opacity. So I'll come into properties. I'm going to drop the opacity to 0, and I'm going to set a keyframe there as well. And now we can just see the shadow. So I'm going to fix that. I'm going to go into the third element, the shadow. I'm going to activate it. This is important. You need to have activated it inside the node before you can work in the modifier. You can't add it afterwards in the modifier. It must be on in the node. I'm going to come to the opacity. Because the shadow and the font are really linked together, I don't want to keep jumping backwards and forwards changing these parameters if I change my mind in a week. Hover over opacity, right click, and we can come down to connect to, and we can select follower opacity. So now the shadow opacity matches whatever the element 1, the font is. Now I must remember to come down and do that for rotation. So X rotation, connect to follower angle X, Y rotation, connect to follower angle Y, and now they're linked, so I don't need to worry about it. I can work in number 1. If I change any of the parameters in here, whether it be the opacity or the rotation, then it will update. If I haven't connected the control, then it won't update. I'm just going to come 3 frames forward, so I'm actually going to click in here and type in 63, makes it easier for me, and then I'm going to change in this element 1. I'm going to bring the opacity back up to full, and then when we come down to this rotation here, I'm going to set that to 0 and that to 0. So this is what we're going to end up on. At the moment it just jumps in, and we're going to use the follower so we get each individual font acting on its own. Scroll to the top, we can come to timing. At the moment, just concentrate on the bottom one. This is the number of frames each action is going to be delayed. If I press 3, that each letter come on every 3 frames. So now if we play from there, I get my effect. Now it's not perfect because it's still linear. I'm going to show you first of all that when I play this, it'll come in, and we're just getting the background come in, and then, oh, we've got some letters. So I think the letters coming in like this is a bit late, so we're going to move them. Another thing to note is if I leave it, it'll play all the way out and then come in again. And I'm actually only focused on this area. So what I'm going to do is about 120 frames. I'm going to hold down the control, click and drag to the 0. So now when I play it, it's going to take a lot of pressure off the computer. Other things we can do, we can come next to the transport controls, right click, and we can switch off motion blur, and we can switch off high quality. So because we're not working on fine detail, we don't need high quality. Another thing we can do, if we come up to the top of the screen, we can activate ROI, which is region of interest. Now when you first activate it, it's on auto. We need to go to set and then just draw a bounding box around your animation. What this means is DaVinci Resolve Fusion's only going to render what's in there, or cache what's in there. It's in the wrong place. I don't want it there. If I drag my mouse in here, I'll notice that, say, 15 frames, this is now in view, and I want the animation of my text to start here rather than too late. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to come into the keyframe editor. If we come up to the top right and select keyframes, opens the keyframe editor. I'm going to make some room. The keyframe editor, if we click in here to highlight it, press F4, it goes to the full screen. In the left here, this is the node, and these are the parameters that we've adjusted. You can come to the right here, we've got zoom to fit, and it will fit them in. And we can actually see the keyframes here. But the playhead is actually where we want it. So this playhead matches this playhead up here. We can highlight the keyframes, and we can just click and drag and bring them back down here. So now, in fact, just there will do. Close the keyframe editor, come back here. What we'll have now is, so it comes in better. Not finished with our follower yet though, we're going to make it a bit more snazzy. So I'm going to drag along the time ruler until we've got all the letters in. So we're going for 73 I think. So 73 frames, and I'm going to add some more animation here. I'm going to come back into the shading, and in 1 I'm going to come all the way down to size, and on the Y I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm then going to come 3 frames forward, so I'm going to come to 76. I'm going to make this Y 1.5, and then going to come another 3 keyframes, and I'm going to put this back at 1. Now I must remember I haven't changed the shadow, so I need to go into 3, I need to come into size, and then on the Y I can right click, connect to, follower, size. So now they're connected, I don't need to worry about them anymore. And now if we look at the animation, I'm just going to drag the render cache a bit further. Now when we look at the animation, what happens is it comes in, writes on, and then we get this little bounce. Put that on the edit page. The trick with the edit page is if we go to the beginning and we press I for an in point, come to the end and we press O for an out point, go back to the beginning and we use the Alt, and I think it's the backslash, make sure looping is on. What it will do is loop through that. But if it doesn't render the first time, then next time it will come in nice and smooth. And this is our animation. So we've gone from a basic lower third animation just coming on the screen to changing the font and using the follower modifier.